Right, good evening, everybody. Um, so I'm going to talk about architecture, agility, or agile architecture, whatever you want to call it. Um, so just basically a few concise points from our experience delivering on agile projects for close upon 10 years, right? So ever since the movement started. So very briefly about Pearson, we are the leading education platform company in the world. We have about 25,000 people worldwide, 900 people, nearly 900 people in the technology center here. And we deliver a number of large learning platforms that are used by our students worldwide, mostly based out of North America. One important thing is that all of our delivery practices are agile. There is no other method of delivery. So we have a number of practices, whether it is Scrum, Kanban, whatever, we employ that. And recently we have the scaled agile framework deployed as well. So we deliver and operate as a scaled agile company. So I'm going to talk about three to four concise points, concise issues that you will deal with as a technology company adopting Agile. Right? So the first argument everybody's going to come up with is big design up front. How much design do you really do up front? Do we do anything at all? Right? So if you look at it back in the day, 15, 20 years ago, when you wouldn't start a process of any software, you would actually go to that depth before starting any project. But then with Agile, we said that is all a waste because that changes over time, because requirements change over time, right? So we went from that extreme to an extreme that said we don't need any design, and we just start writing stuff, and we'll refactor it as we go along, right? So big design upfront, or as the acronym is, it's usually looked upon as a bad practice, or it's a questionable practice. People call it wasteful because you're looking too far ahead that you don't have the visibility to, right? And people automatically have the connotation that it's a waterfall method, right? So, like I said, the counteraction to that was do no design whatsoever and just start writing stuff, building stuff, and see if it works. But the reality is somewhere in between. It's neither the big design upfront or the cowboy method. You do need to have some thought of design, not in depth, but sort of the lateral, right? You just look out, look ahead. What are the next 2 to 3 microservices that you probably need to come up with, right? What are the service components that you need to come up with to keep going forward? So that's the approach that we've found in our experience, that you do just enough design to keep moving forward. So it's not like your only focus is the 2 weeks iteration. You're looking ahead maybe to 1 to 2 months. You figure out what are the design challenges you're going to have to deal with, so that the engineers can keep putting out code and testing them. Right? So it's about lateral thinking, not depth, right, if that makes sense. And you keep moving along that path. You produce just enough documentation, right? It doesn't have to be the full UML diagram stack. It's what you need, right? If use cases don't make sense, they don't make sense, right? A sequence diagram is far more valuable than a detailed and multi-workflow use case diagram, right? So this is what has been our experience. So maybe a deployment model and a class diagram, or I'd say even a deployment model and a sequence diagram is far more beneficial and usable by the team than anything else. So you always are in a iterative state. You keep working on one iteration, you're looking out for the next one, right? So people, one of the ceremonies that happens is the backlog grooming as part of Agile team. So every Agile team does what is called backlog grooming. And primarily what I've noticed is people look at it as a estimation exercise. They want to know how big the rest of their backlog is, right? So they just keep going in, updating numbers, and that's pretty much all they focus on. But they don't really focus on, okay, I have learned this much in these couple of iterations. How does that impact my design? Nobody's going back and reviewing that. So you should always go back, add more detail to your user stories in your backlog, add more acceptance criteria if you know them. So that would give teams a better sense of how to estimate that in the upcoming months, upcoming iterations. So one of the points, Rohan, you made about technical debt, right? So that's what I'm really trying to refer here. You take a tactical view and a strategic view. Strategic view is like, what do you need to have in place or so that you can build the features 2 to 3 months down the line. But you have to take care of problems immediately as well, like tactical problems, like, I did this implementation, so I need to refactor it. So that's one of the evaluations you'll have to keep making, right? So do I need to focus on bringing the bug count down, or do I just keep going forward? So those are evaluations you'll keep making, and those you'll only be able to make it as you keep adding more design details into your user stories, right? So this is the reality when you're running large projects. It's not zero documentation. There is always documentation. But it's not to the level of what a waterfall project 20 years would have been, right? 25 years ago would have been. It's more about just having the right amounts of documentation, right? So as Gall's law says, if you want to build a complex system that works, build a simple one first, and then keep adding to it, right? So you build a solution that works enough for the customer, demonstrate it, get feedback. Because if you spend too much time on it, you never know. It could be a waste also, right? Because it might not be accepted. So this is another problem that you will constantly be dealing with as an Agile team, right? The need to refactor. So, what I think the conclusion that we need to come to is that is how software is built. It's not, you build once and use anywhere. That doesn't exist in software, actually. As much as we'd like to think so, it doesn't exist in reality. And especially in a Agile project where you are learning things, learning new requirements as you go along, you cannot say that you built something correctly the first time, right? So you will always keep refactoring. And it's not a bad practice. Actually, if you look at it, it's a good practice. That is not to say that you just write something and because you can always go back and refactor it. That's not the idea. The idea is you take a calculated risk about the technologies you use, the design decisions you make, and then you can, if it didn't work for you, then you can always come back and refactor. So that's the notion there. So you will always plan for refactor, because ultimately when you look at it, all the customers we serve, they always change their mind about requirements. So if they change, software has to have that same attribute as well. So when that changes, right, we have so many things downstream will change. The scalability needs, the security needs, what platform are we targeting? Is it a multi-mobile platform, or is it just we care only about iOS users or only about Android users, right? So many choices will have to be made. And true to the Agile value, you should always concentrate on working software that models the requirements, and not that you're trying to adapt the requirements to fit the software that you built, right? So you should always keep that in mind. And if you are finding yourself adapting your requirements to fit the software that you built, and if you're spending a lot of time convincing the customer that you should change the requirements because this works better, then you've you have a problem there, right? So you might win the initial negotiations, but in the long run, that's a technical debt that will come back to bite you. So these have been mentioned a little bit. Microservices, something that's hot in the industry right now, DevOps, right? So why should you use microservices is something you should determine for yourself, not because that's what everybody is doing right now, right? You should do it because it allows you to change your software through versioning, through all sorts of good things, that you can update your software and have the least amount of issues doing it, because you have small isolated services that you can upgrade as you go along, right? So you compose the platform a few microservices at a time, so that you are not building a monolith, which we don't do these days. We just build things in smaller manageable components. So one thing we end up dealing with quite a bit is service contracts. So now it's a granted. Pretty much everybody works with some form of an API contract, whether it is a web API or it is something more low level than that. You managing your service contracts is a critical activity. It's no longer, that is left as a afterthought, as a documentation exercise. You have to keep your service contracts up to date. So there are API collaboration tools that are out there that we can use to always, write up the contract first. There are even tools that, based on a contract, can give you a bunch of unit tests that you can use also. So when you're building components, you start from the contract first, and then it gives you an interface you can mock against and start writing test cases against, and then eventually functional code against. DevOps there are a lot of things that are attached to DevOps, that it's technology, that it's tool set, that it is an operations thing. But really DevOps is about going back to the basics, right? It's about the principles, it's the values you want to hold as a team, right? What DevOps, the name really hides, is the fact that you have a shared responsibility of building a product and being in charge of operations of it, right? It's not about operations tool sets. It's not about automation. Automation is there, but the focus of DevOps is about shared ownership and a culture of everybody is able to do anything on the platform, which we've talked about earlier this evening. Why I picked out automation, because we do very little of it. We can certainly do a lot more on all of our projects. We automate it because, we focus on automation these days because it's where the market is, it's where the skill sets are. But you really have to do it because you care about it in your platform, because you care about speed of deployment, you care about being able to integrate and test in less time and understand that your platforms are working, rather than having let's say a 5-day regression. So you would do automation so that you have the quick response to you, and so that you can go ahead from that point without any uncertainty. And if anybody's been to interviews recently, right? I mean, people still ask you about the singleton pattern, the factory. Those patterns, they are important, but there's a whole another set of patterns that are there that we need to worry about. Integration patterns, whether it is the circuit breaker pattern, right? So various integration patterns that are coming up. So we need to really keep looking out so that we can continuously deploy software as we go along, right? So I think we don't look at patterns for fixed problems anymore. We look at patterns that will facilitate better delivery of software also. So that's also something that's out there. And like with anything, there's always constraints in the real world. And you are really basically trading off what your constraints are. You typically, on a waterfall project, you would find all, or the emphasis on the triangle being different, right? So in Agile, if you choose that you want to have the fixed set of features, then obviously your other two ends of the triangle go off, right? Either your time or your cost go off. You can't have all three triangles fixed. This is basically, basic project management. If you compromise on any of the other two corners, you will lose quality, right? So, that's probably a conversation everybody's had at some point, right? You can do whatever you like within this time frame. You can be agile, you can not be agile, I don't care. But this is your fixed time window, and this is your budget, and this is your scope. So that's never a real case. You will always have a trade-off. You would trade off features to be on budget, or you would trade off a budget overruns for features. So that's the reality. And eventually it comes down to this. Everybody's organization is different. Your people are different, your skill sets are different, your motivations certainly are different. So you cannot have a one-size-fits-all agile practice. Scaled agile works for us because we've gone through more primitive phases of agile, and this seems like what should be our next level of agile. But that doesn't mean a team starting tomorrow or company starting tomorrow needs to go to scale agile, because it's depending on your level of maturity, right? So just shipping in, helicoptering in somebody and bringing a whole set of practices is not going to help your team go agile, right? The idea that there is an universal best practice about agile is actually, it's an oversold notion. It doesn't exist. Everything is contextual to where you are, where your organization is, and what are your goals, what do you want to achieve out of agile for you, right? So all you end up doing is doing a bunch of things that don't make sense, like the projects that you called out, right? The Siren project, So they did agile, but they weren't agile. So that's the crux of it, right? So I think there is certainly from the architecture point of view, there's a fair deal you can do as architects, right? Because you come in with experience, you can look ahead and deal with a number of technology challenges. But just as much there are technology challenges, there will always be more primitive problems like this that you will also have to deal with as an agile team. Right? So that's what I'll leave you with. Thank you for your attention. Right? Good evening.